The wall broke a little after midnight, and I felt it in my teeth before I heard it. Not the stone I could have slept through. Scarrow Hold has stood on the Ironclaw coast for 11 generations, and its sea wall has been breached by storm and siege both, and I have slept through worse groaning than stone makes when it gives. What woke me was Kael'morn. 300 years he had run beneath my line like a second heartbeat, quiet as tide, steady as the turning of the seasons, and in all that time I had never once felt him afraid. I felt it that night, sudden and total, a tearing low down in some part of myself I couldn't have named or pointed to before that moment, like something old and load-bearing being asked to carry more than it was built for. I was on the wall before my second boot was laced. My steward Inns was already shouting for the hornmen, and behind me I heard my first captain, Bregan, cursing in the old dialect he only used when he was truly afraid, which was itself a kind of alarm bell in a man who had fought at my side for 20 years without once raising his voice above a battlefield murmur. I should tell you what Scarrow Hold is, so that what came after makes its proper shape in your mind. We are not a soft country. The Ironclaw coast does not permit softness. A strip of black cliffs and colder sea, wolf kingdoms strung along it like beads on a hard wire, each hold bound to its own guardian spirit the way a king is bound to his crown, except that a crown can be set down and a guardian bond cannot. My line has held Scarrow since the first Stonewake walked out of the northern ice with Kael'morn already grown at his heel, though the old songs disagree on which of them found the other first. It does not matter. What matters is that, for 300 years, no threat that came against this hold, not the pirate kings of the southern straits, not the ambitions of Valemorn or Ashenreach or any of the rival packs who might have liked our harbor for their own, had ever gotten past what Kael'morn and my bloodline built between them. That night something did. The thing that had come up out of the black water didn't have a shape I could hold in my mind all at once, not even after. It was wolf-boned, the way the old stories always describe the first corrupted things, but wrong in every proportion a wolf should have, shoulders too wide for its spine, a jaw that unhinged further than any living creature's jaw has any business unhinging, fur gone the gray-black of drowned wood left too long in salt water. Later, the scholars in my court would spend weeks arguing over what to call it, and eventually the name that stuck, from an old fisherman's grandmother's warning, was the hollow wolf, a thing that had once been a guardian or something guardian-shaped, and had been hollowed out by grief or corruption or the deep cold nobody could name, until only the hunger was left wearing the old shape like a stolen coat. The men on the wall were already dying or already running by the time I reached the parapet, and I could not find it in myself to blame either kind of man. I have led soldiers into battles I understood. I had never led anyone into anything like this. Kael'morn met it in the surf, because Kael'morn always meets the threat first. That is the oldest part of the old bargain, older than any crown, that the guardian stands between the danger and the bloodline he is bound to. And the bloodline in turn carries the weight of remembering him, honoring him, never letting the bond go thin from neglect the way some of the southern holds let theirs go thin, until their guardians faded to nothing more than a story their descendants half believed. My guardian is not small. He has never needed to be, not with 3 centuries of devotion behind him, silver fur that holds its own low light even on moonless nights, a build like a hill given the idea of moving. That night, against the thing the sea had spat up, he looked almost gentle by comparison, clean lines where the other was ruin, silver where the other was rot. For one heartbeat, standing on the wall with my sword only half drawn, I let myself believe he'd turn it back into the water the way he'd turned back every threat before it, the way 300 years had taught me to expect. Then the hollow wolf got its jaws around his shoulder, and I heard Kael'morn scream in a register no wolf should own, not pain alone, though there was plenty of that, but something closer to the sound a man makes when he realizes, mid-fall, that there is no ledge below him after all, and something in my own chest cracked open like a door I hadn't known was in the wall of me. I went over the parapet without waiting for the ladder. I fought. I don't remember most of it in the clean, orderly way the songs will no doubt eventually make of it, because a king's memory of his own battles is never as tidy as what the bards prefer. I remember the cold of the surf closing around my knees, colder than any cold I'd felt in 30 years on this coast, cold enough to feel like a second combatant. I remember driving my blade into something that bled black instead of red, black and thick and wrong, and I remember the strange give of its flesh, less like striking muscle and more like striking waterlogged wood. I remember Bregan at my shoulder, shouting something I couldn't parse over the sound of it, and I remember, more than any of that, the exact moment the hollow wolf finally broke off and dragged itself back into the black water, not defeated. I understood even then, only satisfied, the way a thing that has already gotten what it came for doesn't need to linger, and Kaelmorn did not stand up after. He lay in the ruined stable yard where he'd finally fallen, too large for the space he'd chosen, breathing in a rhythm I had never once heard from him in 30 years of shared life. And around his torn shoulder, the silver light that had run beneath his first since before my grandfather's grandfather's time was guttering the particular way a coal does right before it gives itself over to ash. "My lord," In's ashen, his voice gone thin, "the healers are already sent for. Bring every one of them. Bring the beast masters. Bring anyone in this hold who has ever set a bone or calmed a frightened animal. I don't care if they clean stables or sit my council table, bring them." They came. Every healer in Scarrow Hold and the beast masters after them, robed men with their careful theories and their long training, and not one of them could get within 10 feet of him. That was the terrible part, the part none of the songs about guardian bonds ever prepare you for. He wasn't attacking, not with intent. That would almost have been a mercy, something to fight against with a clean conscience. He simply couldn't tell friend from threat any longer, and a creature that sighs, confused and in agony, is its own catastrophe regardless of intent. He had already put one of the younger stable boys through a fence rail without meaning to, a glancing blow from a tail the width of a ship's mast, and though the boy would live, the surgeon who set his arm did not meet my eyes when he told me so. "He's turning," Bregan said quietly, at my shoulder, saying the word none of us had wanted to say aloud since the moment we saw the black blood on that other creature and understood, all at once, what it must once have been. "Like the thing in the water, my lord, he's turning." I did not answer him, because I had no answer, and a king who has no answer learns early, if he wants to keep the confidence of the men who follow him, that it is better to say nothing at all than to lie about having one. I called my council before dawn, not because I believed a council of frightened old men could offer anything useful, but because a hold in crisis needs the appearance of order even when order is the one thing nobody in the room actually possesses. Lord Aldrich Vane, my father's man before he was mine, oldest and most cautious of the lot, said what I already knew he would say before he'd finished clearing his throat. "My lord, if the guardian cannot be reached, cannot be calmed, cannot be trusted near the people he is meant to protect, you know what the old law says must be done." "I know what the old law says." "Then you know that a corrupted guardian is worse than no guardian at all. He could turn on the hold itself. On you, my lord, on your own bloodline, which the old law calls the greater grief of the two, but no less a necessity for it. He is not corrupted." I heard my own voice come out harder than I meant it, harder than a king should let his voice come out in front of men he needs to keep steady. "He is wounded and grieving something none of us understand yet, and if any man at this table suggests caging him again before every other avenue is exhausted, I will remember who suggested it." Silence. The particular silence of men who have decided it is wiser to be quiet than to be right. I left them there and went back to the stable yard, because I did not know what else to do with myself, and because some old, unkinged part of me simply could not bear to be anywhere else while Kaelmorn suffered. It was near dawn. The sky gone, that particular bruised gray that comes before real light on the Ironclaw coast, when the crowd of healers and frightened stable hands parted for someone nobody had sent for. I knew her by sight, barely, one of the kennel hands, the quiet one the other girls teased for talking to the hounds like she believed they understood her, the one the kennel master had mentioned to me only once, in passing, as someone he meant to move to laundry work because she was too soft for dog work, and too soft for war work besides, my lord, though gods know she's gentle with the animals. I'd have said the same if I had thought of her at all before that morning, which I had not. She was slight, plain dressed, her dark hair still in its night braid as though she'd come straight from her cot without stopping to think better of it, and she walked toward the largest and most dangerous animal in the kingdom, the way another woman might walk toward a hearth fire to warm cold hands. "Get back," one of the beast masters lunging for her arm and missing. "Girl, get back, he'll kill you and never know he's done it." She didn't get back, she didn't even slow. She stopped just outside the reach of him, close enough that every soul in that yard drew breath at once and held it, and started to hum. I want to tell you I recognized the tune. I did not. It wasn't a song of my hold, nor any hold I knew from 30 years of visiting rival courts and hearing their music at their high tables. Something older than that, worn soft at the edges the way a river stone is worn soft, not by any single hand, but by 100 years of the same current running over it again and again. Low, unhurried, the kind of sound a mother makes over a cradle she isn't certain will see the night through, and is determined the child will not know that from her voice. Kael'morn's ragged breathing did not slow all at once, but it slowed. "Easy," she said, "not to me, not to the healers crowding uselessly at the edges, only to him, only ever to him the whole time she was in that yard. I know it hurts something fierce. You don't have to be quite so big about it, though, do you?" A laugh broke out of me before I could master it, shocked, entirely wrong for the moment, and somehow the truest sound I'd made since the wall broke. Nobody talked to my guardian like that. In 30 years of rule, nobody had ever once talked to anything the way she talked to him, plain and unafraid and faintly, absurdly fond, as though the largest and most dangerous animal in the kingdom were simply a very large dog having a very bad night. He turned his massive head toward her voice. Every healer in that yard went utterly still, certain, I could see it on their faces, that particular held-breath dread, that they were about to watch her die for her foolishness in front of their king. He put his muzzle against her open palm instead, the way a hound will when it is finally allowed to stop pretending to be brave. Something old in my own blood lifted its head then, the way I'd seen Kael'morn's ears prick, over 3 decades, before I'd even registered the danger myself. A recognition arriving ahead of any reason I could give it, quiet and absolute and entirely unbidden, the way you know a door has opened somewhere else in your own house before you've seen who came through it. "Who are you?" I said, and it came out rougher than I intended, rough enough that Inns glanced at me sideways. She didn't kneel. She didn't even look away from the wolf breathing under her steadying hand. "Wren, my lord, I clean the kennels." "You do a great deal more than that, it would seem, for a woman who cleans kennels." "My grandmother did too," she said simply, as though that explained the whole of it, and I would learn over the days that followed, it very nearly did. The healers wanted to sedate him with draughts that might as easily have stopped his heart as calmed it. The beast masters, once they'd recovered their nerve, wanted to build a second cage inside the first, iron within iron, and pray it held until he either healed or died. My counsel, in the careful, bloodless language of men who have never once had to love anything larger than their own ambitions, wanted to discuss the necessary options, for what became of a guardian who could no longer be trusted near the people he existed to protect. Aldrich Vane, in particular, kept using the word contingency in a tone that made my jaw ache from clenching it. I sent them all away, every one of them, and kept only Wren. She stayed with Kael'morn 3 full days. I gave her no order to. I simply found reason after reason to be near the stable yard while she worked, telling myself, the first day, that I was watching over my guardian, which was true, and telling myself, by the second day, that this was the whole of my reason for lingering, which was already becoming less true with every hour that passed. She fed him with her own hands when he'd take food from no one else. Raw meat at first then. As the second day wore on and his appetite steadied along with his breathing, whole cuts he could actually be bothered to chew, which the beast masters assured me, with visible relief, was itself a very good sign. She sang to him, though sang is too grand a word for it. She pieced fragments together the way you'd patch a good coat with whatever cloth came nearest to hand, half-remembered verses from what I eventually understood to be a dozen different old songs, none of them complete, all of them somehow exactly what the moment needed. She slept, when she slept at all, curled against his uninjured flank as though the size of him troubled her, no more than the size of a hearth might trouble a woman used to cooking over one. "Your grandmother," I said on the second night, when I had entirely stopped pretending to myself that I had other business in that yard. I had brought bread and a skin of watered wine, ostensibly for her, though I suspect some part of me simply wanted an excuse to sit in the straw beside her and my wounded guardian both. "Tell me about her." Wren did not look up from the poultice she was pressing, with more care than I'd have credited to hands so small, against the worst of Kaelmorn's torn shoulder. She was a wolfsinger. That's what the old women in our village called it, back before there weren't enough of us left for the name to mean much of anything to anyone but us. She used to say our blood was married to the old guardian lines, generations back, before the pack wars scattered everyone who carried the gift to the four winds and further. She could quiet a rabid hound with nothing more than her two hands and her voice, my lord. I thought it was only a story mothers tell their daughters to make bathing the dogs feel less like a chore, right up until I got old enough to try it myself and found out it wasn't a story at all. And now, she finally looked up at me, and it was not the deference I had grown used to receiving from every soul in Scarrow since before I could properly walk. Something steadier than deference, something closer to an equal's regard. "Now I think some stories are true, my lord, and nobody ever bothered writing them down because the women who lived them were kennel hands and laundresses, and not kings." I had no answer for that either, and I was beginning to suspect, with something between alarm and a feeling I did not yet have a proper name for, that I would need to get comfortable with not having one, in her company. "Why did you come?" I asked her on the third night, when Kaelmorn's breathing had steadied enough that even the most cautious of the beast masters had begun to speak of him in the past tense of danger rather than the present. "Nobody sent for you. Nobody would have thought to." "I heard him," she said, and for the first time since she'd walked into that ruined stable yard, something in her voice went uncertain, almost apologetic, as though she expected me to think less of her for the admission. "Not with my ears, my lord. Somewhere else." My grandmother said the old guardian bloodlines and the old wolfsinger blood used to run together, before they were scattered, that a true guardian in real pain could be heard, by the right ears, the way you'd hear a shout across open water even over a gale. I've never heard anything like it before. I didn't understand what it was until I was already in the yard and saw him. "Do you regret coming?" "No," she said, immediate certain, the first entirely unguarded thing I'd heard her say. "Though I expect the kennel master will have plenty to say about my leaving the dogs untended 3 days running." "The kennel master," I told her, with more warmth in my voice than I'd have thought to allow a servant 3 days prior, "will say nothing at all, or he will find himself explaining to me exactly why he thought a woman who can calm a guardian no healer in this hold could touch was better suited to washing hound fur." She laughed at that, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and Kaelmorn's tail thumped once against the straw at the sound of it. A small, absurd, entirely welcome sign that the creature who had nearly died 3 days prior still had that much ordinary self left in him. On the third night Kaelmorn stood. He was still hers before he was mine in that moment, turned his great head to check she was near before he so much as tested his weight on the wounded leg, the way a child looks for its mother's face before attempting a first unsteady step. But the silver light beneath his fur had steadied, banked coal now instead of dying ember, and when his eyes finally found mine over her shoulder, I saw my own guardian looking back at me again. Not the drowned, hollowed thing the sea had nearly made of him 3 nights prior. Kael'morn, whole enough, weary but present, the 3 centuries of him gathered back into one recognizable shape. "He'll hold," Wren said, running one hand along his newly steady flank with the particular briskness of someone who does not want to make too much of her own relief. "For now, my lord, if it comes again." "It will come again." I did not say it as a question, because some old certainty in me, the same certainty that had felt the wall break in my teeth before I heard it, already knew the hollow wolf had not finished with us. She nodded slowly, like she had already known that too, like she had been quietly readying herself for it the whole 3 days she'd spent humming half-remembered lullabies to a monster none of my trained men could so much as approach. Word of what had happened in the stable yard did not stay contained to the stable yard, of course. Word never does, in a hold the size of Scarrow, where every servant knows every other servant's business by suppertime and every lord's business by the following morning. Within a week, half the hold had some version of the story, the kennel girl who'd walked up to a dying guardian and sung him back from the brink. Some said, though others, less generously, whispered that it was witch work, or worse, some old and forbidden bond that ought to trouble their king rather than gratify him. Aldrich Vane, predictably, was among the worst camp. "My lord," he said, at the next council I could not avoid calling, "I do not dispute what the girl accomplished. I dispute the wisdom of allowing a kennel hand, however gifted, however fortunate her lineage might once have been, unsupervised access to the single most valuable asset this hold possesses. What is she truly? What do we know of her people, her loyalties, whether this so-called gift might be turned against us as easily as for us? She is the reason my guardian is alive to argue about it all," I said, "which is more than I can say for anyone else at this table, including you, Aldrich. With respect, my lord, gratitude is not the same as prudence. A king's heart and a king's judgment are meant to be separate instruments. I would be a poor adviser if I did not say so plainly, whatever displeasure it earns me." I did not have a clean answer for him, because some part of me, the part that had lain awake 3 nights running listening for the particular rhythm of a sleeping woman's breath through the thin stable-yard wall, telling myself it was only concern for Kael'morn that kept me there, suspected he was not entirely wrong to raise the question, even if his motives for raising it were tangled up with older, more familiar fears about a king's bloodline marrying beneath its station. I did not send her back to the kennels either, that much I was certain of. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I asked her to teach me what she knew, insofar as it could be taught to someone without her particular blood. "It isn't a skill you can learn the way you'd learn swordwork, my lord," she told me, the first time I asked, in the modest room off the main kennel yard where she'd been quartered since the second night, at my own order, over her polite but visible discomfort at being given quarters above her station. "It's not technique. It's listening, mostly. Actually listening, the way most people only pretend to while they wait for their turn to speak." "Show me then, teach me to actually listen." She looked at me for a long moment, the particular assessing look I was coming to recognize as her deciding whether a person deserved her honesty or merely her courtesy. She must have decided in my favor, because she took me, the following morning, not to Kael'morn. "He trusts me already, my lord. That's not a fair test of anything." But to the kennel yard's oldest and most troubled hound, a scarred gray bitch named Ash who had bitten 3 separate handlers in as many months and was, by the kennel master's own admission, likely bound for a quiet, merciful end within the season. "Sit," Wren told me. "Not near her. Just sit and be quiet and don't try to make her like you. Everyone who's failed with her has tried to make her like them. She can smell wanting from across the yard. I sat in the straw of a working kennel yard in my own boots and good coat, feeling considerably less kingly than I had felt in some time, and I watched Wren do nothing at all for the better part of an hour except sit near the scarred hound and occasionally, very quietly, hum. "You're not doing anything," I said eventually, more baffled than impatient. "I'm doing everything," she said, without looking away from the dog. "I'm not asking her for a single thing. That's the whole trick, my lord, if you want to call it a trick. Every person who's ever frightened that hound wanted something from her: obedience, affection, proof she wasn't dangerous. I don't want anything from her at all. I'm only here. Watch." By the second hour, the scarred gray hound had crept close enough to rest her scarred muzzle against Wren's knee, and I understood, watching it, that I had just been given the whole of the lesson in a single quiet afternoon, and that it was a lesson that applied to considerably more than dogs, though I did not say so aloud. "Your grandmother taught you this." "My grandmother taught me everything I know that's worth knowing, my lord. She died 4 winters back. I still hear her voice sometimes in the old songs. I think that's half of why I sing them, so I don't lose the sound of her." There was a grief in that admission too plain and too unguarded for me to answer with anything but silence, and so I gave her silence, and she seemed to understand it was offered as its own kind of respect rather than indifference, because she did not fill it with anything else, and we sat together in the straw a while longer, saying nothing, wanting nothing, which I was slowly coming to understand was its own considerable gift. The weeks that followed were not without their own smaller troubles, the ordinary friction of a court adjusting to a shape it had not expected. Some of the kennel girls, who had once teased Wren for talking to the hounds, now would not meet her eye at all, uncertain whether deference or suspicion was the safer posture. My steward Inns, ever practical, quietly arranged for her a proper allowance and proper dress, which she accepted with visible discomfort, and wore with the particular stiffness of someone who has spent her whole life being told plain was safest. "You needn't have," she told me, the first evening she appeared at the high table in a gown better suited to a lesser lord's daughter than a kennel-hand, seated, at my own insistence and over several visibly pained looks from Aldrich Vane, near enough to my own chair that the whole hall took note of it. "I don't need silk to sing to a wolf, my lord." "No," I agreed, "but I find I would rather look at you in silk than in kennel canvas, if the choice is mine to make, and tonight it is." "That's a king's reason, not a kind one." "Can it not be both?" She considered that with the same careful weighing she gave everything, and did not entirely answer it, which I was learning was itself a kind of answer from her. The things she did not deny outright, she was generally willing to let stand. There was, too, the matter of Lord Seelech of Ashenreach, our neighboring hold to the north, who arrived that same fortnight with his customary retinue and his customary hints, never quite spoken plainly enough to refuse outright, always plain enough to be understood, that his own daughter, Isolde, a perfectly pleasant and perfectly political young woman I had known since childhood, might make a fitting match for a king whose hold had just weathered a crisis, and might benefit from the alliance her marriage would secure. "You've gone quiet, my lord," Isolde herself observed, with more shrewdness than her father generally credited her, on the second evening of their visit, when I'd been rather more distracted by watching Wren across the hall deep in some low conversation with the kennel master that had him laughing for what I suspected was the first time in months, than by the conversation actually in front of me. "My apologies, it has been a difficult season." "So I've heard. The whole coast has heard, my lord, a guardian nearly lost, and a kennel girl who called him back from it with nothing but a song. It's rather a good story. My father's bards have already made 3 different versions of it, none of them, I suspect, particularly accurate." She followed my gaze briefly to where Wren sat, and something in her expression softened into an understanding I had not expected from her. "Ah, I see. Well, I always did think forced alliances made for poor marriages and worse wine, my lord, whatever my father may hint at over supper. I'll tell him myself that this particular match was never going to take, and spare us both the trouble of pretending otherwise for the rest of the visit. I was, I confess, considerably more grateful to her for that plain kindness than I let show at the time, and I have made certain, in the years since, that Ashenreach never wanted for Scarrow's friendship regardless of the marriage that never came to be. It came again on a night 11 days after the first attack, and this time it did not wait for the wall to weaken on its own. It tore through the rebuilt Seagate whole, timber and iron both, the way a thing returns to finish what it started when it has had time enough to grow hungrier rather than more cautious. I felt it in my teeth again, the same tearing low-down feeling, except this time I was already moving before Inns reached my door, already shouting for Bregan, already half certain of what I would find before I reached the wall. Kaelmorn met it at the gate this time, healed enough to stand his ground properly, and for one terrible, hopeful moment I believed the 11 days of healing had been enough, that this time would end differently, quickly, cleanly. It did not. The hollow wolf had grown in the 11 days since we'd last seen it, or else it had simply been holding something back the first time, testing rather than truly attacking, and what came through the gate this second time was larger, faster, and considerably more certain of itself than the ruined thing that had crawled out of the surf a fortnight before. It went for Kaelmorn specifically, the way a wounded predator returns to the one who marked it, and within moments I understood we were not fighting the same fight twice. We were fighting a harder version of it, and I did not know if my guardian, healed but not yet fully restored, had the reserves left to survive a second mauling. I fought at his flank this time, close enough to feel the wrongness of the creature's breath on my own skin, and it was worse than the first night by every measure that mattered, because now I understood precisely what I stood to lose and had no strategy at all against that particular kind of understanding. Kaelmorn took a second wound, worse than the first, tearing along the same shoulder that had only just begun to properly knit, and I felt the fraying begin again in him. Not fear this time, or not only fear, but something colder and more absolute, the particular unraveling of a creature who has been asked to be strong for 300 years running, and has, on this one specific night, nothing left in reserve to be strong with. Rorik, Bregan's voice from somewhere behind me, ragged with an urgency I had rarely heard from him in 20 years of shared battles. He's turning again, my lord, he's turning. Ren, I don't remember deciding to shout her name. It simply left me, the way a prayer leaves a man who has never once prayed properly in his life, but finds himself, in one specific moment, entirely out of any other option worth trying. She was already running toward the broken gate when I turned to look for her, past guards who tried and failed to catch her arm, past the smoking wreckage of the second wall, straight toward two creatures large enough to end her without either of them particularly meaning to in the chaos of the fight. I had never in my life been more afraid for another living soul, and I include in that every battle I have fought at my own father's side. Every moment I once thought was the worst fear a man could carry. Rorik, get him clear of the gate. She had never once used my given name before that night, not in all the weeks since the stable yard. I would remember it for the rest of my life, the particular shape of it in her voice, not my title, not my lord, only the plain, unadorned fact of me, a man she needed to hear her over the noise of a battle neither of us had asked for. I got Kaelmorn's massive head turned, hauling with both hands at fur and hide, shouting something that was more animal sound than actual words. She got close enough, in the same breath, to press both hands flat against his heaving, blood-slicked side, close enough that I nearly turned back for her rather than finish clearing my guardian's path, certain some part of me would rather die pulling her back than watch what came next. Not tonight. Her voice had lost every trace of the softness I'd grown used to over the preceding weeks, fierce now, absolute, nothing gentle left in it at all. You don't get to be lost tonight, do you hear me? Look at him. Look at Rorik, right there, fighting for both of you. You have kept this man's whole bloodline alive for 300 years. You do not get to stop now for one bad wound on one bad night. I am here. I am not letting either of you go, not while I have breath left to say so. I do not know, to this day, precisely what passed between the two of them in that moment. Some old inheritance of blood and song neither Ren nor I will ever fully understand or properly explain, older than my crown, older than her grandmother's grandmother's grandmother, reaching back to whatever first bound the old wolfsinger lines to the old guardian lines before the pack wars tore every such bond apart and scattered its pieces across 100 lesser holds. But the silver light beneath Kael'morn's fur flared up bright and whole and entire, brighter than I had ever once seen it in 30 years at his side, and my guardian turned back to the hollow wolf not ragged and failing but whole. 3 centuries of guardianship gathered back into a single clean, furious, deliberate shape. Between the two of us, my sword, his teeth, and her voice steady behind us the entire time like a hand set firm against the small of my back, refusing to let either of us fall. We drove the hollow wolf back through the ruined gate and into the black water beyond it, and this time, when it went under, it did not surface again. Whatever grief or corruption had made it, whatever hollowed-out guardian bond had once given it its terrible shape, the sea took it back and kept it, and Scarrowhold's watchfires burned unbothered every night that followed, for all the years I have reigned since. They wanted, the following morning, to give her a purse of silver and see her quietly return to the kennels, as though what she had done twice over, once with patience and song, once with nothing but nerve and a voice that would not be argued with, was a service to be compensated rather than a truth about her that the whole hold had just watched proven beyond any further doubt. Inns actually suggested it first, not unkindly, simply because it was the shape of the world he understood best. A woman does something remarkable, a king rewards her generously, and everyone quietly returns to precisely where they were standing before. I called the whole hold into the rebuilt gate yard instead, every soul from the highest lord to the lowest stable boy, Kael'morn whole and silver bright, and healing properly at my side for the first time in a fortnight, and I took Ren's hand in front of every last one of them, including Aldrich Vane, whose face, I confess, I did not particularly try to spare from what came next. For 300 years, I said, loud enough to carry to the furthest edge of that crowd, my line has believed the guardian bond was ours alone to carry, that it began and ended with the blood of Stonewake and nothing else besides. I was wrong, and I say so plainly, in front of every one of you, because a king who cannot admit an error this large has no business asking his people to trust him with the larger ones. That bond was never mine to carry without her, nor without every wolfsinger who came before her, unnamed and unthanked, doing this same quiet, unglamorous, essential work for generations, while the songs only ever remembered the kings. It was always meant to be carried by both lines together, the way it was carried before the wars scattered it. And I mean to spend whatever years I have left as your king making certain the whole of this coast knows precisely whose hands truly held this hold together, on the 2 nights it mattered most. She did not cry, though I noted, glancing about, that at least half the yard did, Inns prominent among them despite his best efforts at composure. She only looked at me, steady as she had been with the wolf on both terrible nights, and said, quiet enough that it carried only to me, I only ever meant to quiet him, my lord. I never meant for any of the rest of it. You quieted both of us, I told her, and I have never in 30 years of rule said anything I believed to be truer. Years later, when our own pups, 3 of them, at last count, each one more determined than the last to test the patience of the household hounds, tumble over Kael'morn's great silver paws in the very stable yard he once nearly wrecked in his grief, I will still sometimes come upon Ren humming that same worn, half-remembered tune to them, patched together the way she always patched her songs, from fragments too precious to let go entirely unremembered. There was no grand coronation needed to make any of it more real than it already was. No vow stamp beyond the plain truth I'd said aloud in that gate yard. Only a woman the whole hold once thought too soft for anything that mattered, teaching an old wolf's grandpups to sit still and be loved, exactly the way she once taught their grandsire, on the worst night either of us has ever lived through, not to be lost.